You'll just not see me lead a technology team with AI first. It's not about the technology. And once it becomes about the technology, that's when you start getting this disconnect between business and tech.
That's not how we're going to do it. We're going to do it one at a time, and we're going to do it the hard way. And so that was for me one of those positive moments where I'm like, that's leadership right there, is when it's hard, right? You show up.
Can you imagine the last job you're doing before you retire? Now we got a target we can shoot at, and we can start breaking down. So let's see, what's the journey look like to be in that role? That's the kind of mindset for the C-suite. You still got to do the downstack. Technology is still yours. I'm just saying that that's not what's going to keep you in the C-suite, and that's not what's going to help you be successful. You're going to be successful in that role only if
So I'm joined here today, and I'm really excited about this, by Rusty Atkinson. He's the VP of IT and Technology at Clearway Health, and also the author of a brand new book on leadership called The Integrity Edge. We've talked a couple of times over the years, but I know that he's had a phenomenal career. Rusty, just to get started, I'd love to know a little bit about, tell me how you got in that chair. Like, tell me a little bit about your career. How'd you get into IT in the first place?
Oh my goodness. I got into IT kicking and screaming. Many years ago, I honestly fell into it, Matt. I remember one of the first conversations I had with my wife, who we've now been married 33 years. We worked together in retail sales, and it was about right time the PC started being sold in like retail electronic stores. And I just kind of had a knack for it. She's like, Rusty, that wasn't my girlfriend at the time, but she's like, really, you got a knack for this. You should really think about a career in computers. Oh, you're out of your mind. I want nothing to do with that. I can't see having a. So then fast forward just, a year or so later, I'm teaching classes, doing little, I call that a chop shop really, is with small networking and PC builds and stuff. And so I started in 92, probably building PCs and doing little local area networks. Long before Ethernet was a thing.
Yeah, crimping those BNC.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Not the word.
You got to get that pin really, really squeezed there. Yeah.
Oh, there's nothing. I can't tell you how many times I had to troubleshoot just bizarre behaviors because the network was so unstable.
Yeah.
But anyway, it started there. My first great gig, I talk about it in my book. My first great gig, my first good gig. It wasn't actually great in the scheme of things, but I was as a field engineer for a little value-added reseller in Arlington, Texas, where I would go do network stuff, Microsoft OS things, messaging, Lotus Notes, that type of stuff. And it kind of got going there. And that was the beginning of the career. I went from there, was an engineer with Paranet, which is a company Sprint bought and destroyed. I'm sorry, they bought and
leveraged the synergies
and
out
leveraged into oblivion. Yes. But that was a time in the late 90s when the tech field was like the Wild West. If you had a strong pulse, I mean, that's all that was really required for you to make it go in. So really, I was fortunate with the timing. And I started leading teams in the late 90s. And then by 2000, I took my first gig at an enterprise job at ST Microelectronics. And that was about the time when I realized that I was an above average engineer.
Okay.
But I wasn't the head geek in the room. I was never there was always somebody who seemed to have a knack for it more than me. But I also looked around like our leadership teams, they're nice guys, and they're almost all guys at the time, but they're just they were the geekiest geek that got promoted into a role and, wasn't. And so I realized that I could be an above average engineer and probably have a really good career, but where I really think I can do and really shine is if I started leading these folks. And so that was in 2000, right after that disastrous Y2K January 1st. Oh, actually nothing happened on that day.
Yeah.
But right after that, it was probably about when I'd say my career really started rolling. And then it wasn't long into that when I realized I wanted to be a CIO at a public company. And so from there on, until recently, a lot of the moves could be explained with that. The goal was CIO at public company. So what do you got to do?
So let me ask a question about that, because I think the clarity that you have there, CIO at a public company, is something that a lot of people don't have. They're kind of just, and I'm gonna be candid, I'm the CEO of a company, and I bumbled my way into this job, right? So I don't know that career journey, but What was it about the CIO seat in particular? You mentioned public companies, so there's something obviously specific there. What is it about that you're like, that's the brass ring for me? What
Yeah.
was the hope?
I mean, it came from me. Who was it? Start with the end in mind. Who's that? That's
Oh, is that
I can't think of
yeah, no, I know. Yeah.
start with the end in mind. Seven Habits. Covey. It was Covey.
Yeah, cover. Yeah.
Start with the end in mind. I probably read that, and I was thinking, I don't know what my next promotion is going to be because I don't know what opportunity is going to present itself. But can I look at the end and decide what my last gig is before I finish?
Got it.
And probably it was the 20-something-year-old ego.
Okay.
I'm Superman. I can take over the world kind of thing. It probably was that. It was probably me thinking, I'd sure like to make a lot of money. And so that's where the money is, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So it was probably pretty thin, pretty superficial that I wanted to do that. But I've been that kind of guy that it's like, I can see a goal. If I can articulate a goal, then I do a pretty good job of staying on track to pursue it. But then over the years, the reason for that kind of morphed.
Okay.
And candidly, having accomplished it at Signify, but almost by the time I did it, it had lost some of its luster.
Okay.
If I'm honest. It got to a point where it was more about the job I'm doing for the team that's been put in my charge. And the fact of the matter is that the CIO has a bigger job than the VP, and VP has a bigger job than the director. And so the scope of influence is greater. And so that became important. We'd look around, and I talk about this a lot in the Integrity Edge. There's a lot of examples of the self-serving, self-centered, egotistical types that they're cliched. They're so common, right? But they're real. It happens all the time. And I just know how I feel when I'm in that kind of position where my boss is a knucklehead. I know something different works better. And so it got to the point where it was about that. It was about having a span of control where I can do the things the right way.
So let me ask about that, because one of the things I know in my career, I went from individual contributor where I was pretty good, I was slanging software and doing stuff and doing technical work. And I became a manager. And I remember when I became a manager, I went, oh, okay. All right. Now, okay. And then when I became like a VP level, I had another one of those where I was like, oh, and as a C level, same thing. I was like, so every one of those things I kind of had like, tell me a little bit about that, as you took that leadership leap, did you have a moment like that? And when did you sort of like see the integrity lens, right?
Okay. So there's two very, very different questions, right? Let me tackle the first one first.
Yeah.
So many ahas. I've often said that the manager job, and I speak from a background of technology, but I suspect this might be the case in any discipline. But in technology, I think that first manager job is the hardest job to get. It's the hardest job to get because the company is looking at you as an individual contributor who's if they're looking at you for a promotion, that's crushing it, right? But do I want to pull my best performer out of an IC role to give them a manager where they might not do a great job? So I think that the first manager job is the toughest one to get, but I don't think it's the toughest one to do because the manager can still be successful doing a lot of the things they did to get there.
Okay.
Right? Now they have people management responsibilities, but oftentimes the scope is such that if you just bust it, and you can continue doing a lot of I'm the best engineer, so I can keep doing a lot of that work, and you can hide some deficiencies. That stops at the next promotion at director.
Okay.
Now you're paying the bills with a new set of skills.
Okay.
Right? I think director is probably the hardest jump. But the move from VP to C-suite it's complex in its own right. I was just talking to a gentleman this morning in a coaching session about that phenomenon, being in the boardroom, and I've yet to be in a boardroom across all the roles I've had where they want to talk about technology. They're wholly uninterested in the one.
Unless it's AI. Like,
but then they're not actually even interested in the technology then, right? They're fancy, shiny new thing. When you're in the room, it's about how do you make your peers more successful, right? And so the way you talk and the way you focus and the research you do and the preparations you do become more about, let me get in with the head of sales and see what she's working on. What are her fears and her dreams, and let me see if I can keep the fears from happening and make the dreams happen faster, right? if you have that that's the kind of mindset for the C-suite, is more about, you still got to do the down stack. Technology is still yours. Product security, if you've got those, they're still yours. I'm not suggesting that you take your eye off that. I'm just saying that that's not what's going to keep you in the C-suite, and that's not what's going to help you be successful. You're going to be successful in that role only if you can translate the fears and dreams of your peers into actions for your team. I've said it to the point where I should get a bumper sticker. It's almost never about the technology. The things that we do on my team, it's almost never about the technology.
So let me ask, because sorry, I was just going to say, it's a fascinating point, and actually, you're not the first person to echo this notion of the horizontality of the C-level executive, of this idea that at that point your first team shifts and your discipline shifts to focusing on them. I'm super curious, when you did that, was there an approach you took to did you have I'm going to meet with each one of these executives and ask them a series of questions? How did you get in with them? How did you know how to do that? Did you fumble a little bit? Like if it's my first day as that C-level, how am I doing this?
Did I fumble a bit? It was a question you asked in the middle of that. I fumbled all the time, right? I guess I don't just iterate in the way we run technology. I iterate in personal execution too.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a silver bullet.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to get into where their work is happening.
Okay.
Meaning I can't have a one-on-one with the head of sales and expect to understand the problems and challenges and opportunities that she's running into with her team and with the customers, because she's not doing that work when she's talking to me.
Okay.
The context is not right. So if you can get into their meeting, if you can go along, tag along on a sales call, if you can be on a call when she's talking, be in there when the work is getting done. If you're in there when the work is getting done, you're bringing into that conversation. No, you're bringing into that environment an entire experience that you cannot give to any of your peers. You can't get them to imagine what's possible from a technology standpoint because they don't have the foundation. So you're bringing the foundation in, and you've got to be the one to imagine, I just heard a problem. What can I leverage to solve that problem? This head of sales isn't going to know, hey, you could go do this thing. She doesn't know it's possible. So you've got to be in the room to hear the friction, to hear the kind of elation and joy when, hey, this opportunity would be awesome. And then translate it into, what can I bring to bear to make the fear go away and make the dream happen faster?
Interesting. So in that case, when you're doing that, when you started doing those sort of you're a ride along, or you're going to the meetings, or you're in the environments, do you have a specific example of an aha moment where you were like, I never would have imagined that?
I probably do. I can't think of a great example. The spirit of that example, at Signify, we had one of Signify's missions, in fact, their primary mission at the time, was to go into the homes of Medicare recipients and do risk assessments, risk evaluations to understand what do they need to be in their care plan. So kind of partner with primary care physicians to have that better understanding. And a big recruitment of those folks who go into the houses, a lot of retired physicians, providers of different sorts, nurses, etc. That recruitment engine was far more complex than I had ever. Why did I know it? I don't know why I didn't know, but it was far more complex, far more challenging than I had any expectation. I'm like, it's a job. There's a lot of people who need jobs. Come on, just tie them together. I mean, I've obviously worked that way, and there's a lot of credentialing and a lot of nuance in that space. And had I not gotten in with that provider recruiting group, watching them do their work, it would have taken me a lot longer to uncover that problem.
Makes sense. I had a very similar thing. We, one of our customers does sort of retail, sort of pop-up retail. And so they have people, they provide the IT for these shops. And we were talking to them and we're like, well, why not Slack? Why not Slack? It's fast, it's asynchronous, it's awesome, And they ended up saying, I need you to think really hard about what a retail store is like. And then understand that the people that you're talking to are actually they're real go-getters. They've done a pop-up store. They're really entrepreneurial. But the issue is they're standing in their store, right? They don't want to take their eyes off anything and start slacking with you. they want you to call them. And like, just think about that. And I was like, I like was transported to a store, and I'm like, that totally makes sense, right? Because you think about phone call support as being like really old and really kind of antiquated, and why would anyone do that? And it's like, oh no, in this person's environment, they want a phone call because they can keep walking around their store, their shop floor. And I'm like,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would probably approach it the same way. I've often said that if the support call got to the phone, then you've already missed your opportunity to provide great experience. Because
Yeah.
what would it take for you to call, I don't know, your mobile provider with a phone problem?
oh,
Like,
I would just switch provider.
and I'd stop using a mobile. There's nothing you wouldn't do first when you called. Yeah.
So you've written a book, and it's a great book. And one of the things is like it's about leadership, and it's specifically like the thing that weaves through it, even in the title, is this notion of like integrity and the idea of like leading almost with honor and integrity. So it starts with this vignette, right? Like, and it's a pretty powerful vignette of sort of like you realizing the impact of not having integrity in the workplace, and sort of you're the victim of that. I'm kind of curious. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that anecdote and kind of like how that spurred you to like change your career and write a book?
Yeah. And so this throughout the book, I use stories to kind of hammer home points or illustrate points. And I would say if there are 100 stories, I don't know how many there are. If there are 100 stories in the book, 98 of them are true. Maybe one of them is like a summary of
A composite. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
and then one of them is purely made up, and you could probably identify that one whenever you see it. But most of them are absolutely 100% true, and this one is 100% true. So maybe I'll start by, for those who haven't read the book yet, I'll tell the story. I won't mention what company because there's a leader who doesn't come out looking real good in this story. So I was a reasonably new director, had a team that had a lot of technical debt, let's just say. We had a bunch of change management maturity issues. We had a bunch of patching and maintenance issues. Just a lot of table stakes just weren't being done well. And it wasn't just in my spot. I had this much and the tech team was this big, right? So I had a little part of it, but it was the same. Everybody was having these same maturity issues. And so I spent a fair amount of time with a pretty like broad brush. What do we need to do to fix it? And I put together this plan that was comprehensive, including my spot, but it was comprehensive, the entire tech stack, about up in our game, right? And it was broad, but it was detailed on the efforts and initiatives that we needed to launch and the support we needed to make them happen. And I talked to my boss, a senior director at the time, and we tweaked a little bit, and we got the message tighter, and he was real supportive. And it was time. Like, okay, so now I'm outside of my scope of responsibility, but let's go pitch it to the VP and see if we can get his support. Got on a call. Decentralized group, so we're all over the country. So got on a call, shared screen, pitch to pitch, and it went over flat. It was like, nah. And the VP said, Rusty, I appreciate you. I'll be put a lot of time into this, but this just isn't the right investment for us. We've got other priorities. It's not the right time. I was disappointed, but whatever. I went back.
What are you going to do?
I don't need permission to improve my spot. I'll just improve my spot. It would be nice if we could get the whole team pulling in the same direction, but that's okay. So let's say that was a Friday. I don't know if it was a Friday, but it was late in the week. Monday comes around, urgent call, Director Plus, full tech stack, Director Plus, get on a call. VP's got some important news to share. Get on the call. And this VP, and I swear I'm not elaborate. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't me dramatizing this. He was so excited to talk about this weekend. I couldn't sleep because of this epiphany I had about what we need to move this company, this team forward. And then he even used the very name that I had given to the initiative. He pitched the initiative that on Friday wasn't the right time or the right priority, pitched it as his epiphany that woke him up in the middle of the night. He was so excited about it. My director is on team. Well, it was years and years ago, so it wasn't Teams or Slack, but whatever was the precursor. He's sending me direct message. Think about it. Don't react yet. Don't react, because he knew it was mine, but he's like, what's important? Is it important that we do the work? Is it important that you get the credit? I'm like, ideally both. But if I had to pick one, I don't want to go look for a job tomorrow. Anybody who would do that kind of thing in a public forum like that, there's no telling what he'd do if I call him out on it.
Sure.
Ultimately, I'd rather have the initiative successful than credit for the initiative. And so I swallowed it. I went and just buckled up and Me and my boss were the only two who knew it was my idea. Well, until I wrote a book about it. And move forward.
Theoretically, that leader is reading this book going, oh, oof.
Maybe. A funny thing is I ran into him, literally almost ran into him in San Francisco at a conference, an RSA conference. Almost ran into him, and it was like we were all friends. So maybe, I don't know. Maybe you didn't remember.
I'm curious, like, one, obviously, you have that moment and you're like, oh, so I'm never going to be that guy. I'm just, and is there one or a standout that's sort of the opposite, like a leadership moment where you look at it and go like, that's actually a beacon. I'll frame it by saying, like, when I was early in my career, there was a leader in an organization that I worked with, and like he and I did not always see eye to eye. I actually, he was one of those guys where I was like, I'm not sure about this guy. I'm really not sure. And then the company had to do layoffs, right? And this guy was like, he was the head guy, and he did the layoffs himself, and he walked each person out to their car carrying their box with them. And he was like, I will do this personally, right? And then he made sure, like, he called the people later and was like, hey, by the way, I'm talking to friends, like, talk to these people, this sort of stuff. He took this deeply personally. I remember looking at that being like, he didn't have to do any of that because HR was like, at that point, it was layoff. So like HR was just like, 50 people in a room, you're done. And he was like, that's not how we're going to do it. We're going to do it one at a time, and we're going to do it the hard way. And like, and so that was for me one of those positive moments where I'm like, that's leadership right there, is when it's hard, right? You show up. I'm curious, do you have sort of the countervailing, like somebody that you looked at early in your career, like that's kind of what I want to be when I'm a leader?
Yeah, there are several people who come to mind. The overarching experience was like that, but I can tell you that my director, and that story I just told, years later, we weren't working together anymore. He was at a role as a VP, and his group went through like a second round of layoffs. And he was getting ready to the point where he was wanting to move back to where he had come from, and so he was thinking about maybe leaving soon anyway. And when the RIF order came through, he offered his salary up so he could save 3 of his folks. So he offered to be riffed, compensation wise worked out where 3 of his people didn't have to be riffed, which, I mean, there were lots of circumstances around it, but the person who would do that is the kind of person that, who earns this integrity edge, what the book was about. And the edge being the engagement and loyalty and creativity and innovation that comes from people who know that they're protected and trusted, and who trust their folks. That's the integrity edge. And when a leader would do something like that, you could bet that he had that edge with his people, for sure.
You mentioned coaching earlier, and one of the things I'm super interested in, because this happens to me, I end up, I'm working with leaders who are different stages in their career, and you're sitting there talking to somebody who's a technologist recently promoted, and from their perspective, every problem is a technology problem, right? And then you're going to sit there and talk to them about, like, you have to think about how the team in this room feels about a particular thing, and you're going to navigate that, right? And I find myself like, do you find as you're talking to younger folks about things like integrity and honesty and trust and these sort of slightly more ephemeral concepts, how do you do that to make it kind of real for them? Or do people just kind of intuitively grab it?
I think everybody intuitively grasps it superficially.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Maybe not deeply enough to change actions.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is your point. I'm a storyteller first and foremost. I think, yeah, you talk to when I say geek, it's a term of endearment. I'm a geek. All the teams I've led are at their heart geeks. And so when I'm talking to an IC or a new manager, individual contributor, or new manager, the foundation is technology, but you can tell a story pretty quickly and help them realize that your skill set, you just added a new bit that's super important. Not to suggest that having integrity and being trustworthy and trusting other people isn't important as an IC, but it becomes, when you're a manager, it becomes an important skill set. When you're a director, I would argue it's the skill set, right? The responsibility of a director in technology. I've never been a director in finance, but I bet they're very similar, right? It's about, you have a mission, you have people, skills, and tasks that you have to be completed to meet that obligation, and let's go. So when you talk through it with the technologists, getting them to appreciate that there's a new set of skills that they have to have some competency in is pretty easy. I think the stories help illustrate those fringe cases that you were talking about. pretty well. But when it boils down to it, it's super personal and individual.
Mhm.
These folks are each having their own hopes and fears and dreams, right? And they're motivated in different ways. And a big part of the way I approach coaching anyway is to help them realize that until they know what those are, their fears, hopes, and dreams, Cynic said, until they know their why, right? Then the actions you get are going to be disconnected, right? They may act, but until you tie it to something that's in their character and their core, they'll be, almost unrelated actions. But if you can get them to have a deep understanding of their why, which is different for each person, but if they can know it for themselves and you can help hold their hand as they're walking through that, now you start having actions and reactions based on the why rather than this disconnected, disjointed sets of, impulses. That's what are really moving the needle.
Yeah. No, that makes tons of sense. And I mean, I think it's super interesting because you're right. Everybody's on this like kind of individuated journey and really sitting down and like asking, so, like understanding each person and where their strengths and weaknesses are and where they're really responding to things, because maybe somebody has the easier, speed bump around, dealing with like other people. Like one of the people I worked with early in my career was preternaturally good at dealing with people. They just were. I am not, right? Like I'm not the social butterfly that's going to be able to do this sort of thing. But they struggled in other ways, right? Like having hard conversations was really difficult. And sadly, it's just something I can do. So like, it absolutely makes sense.
One of the first conversations I have with folks when I get into these kinds of relationships with them is the one that I started at the beginning of this conversation with, is that, can you imagine, this is the exercise I go, Matt, can you imagine the last job you're doing before you retire?
Okay. Yeah.
When you hang up your hat and get your fishing pole and your rocking chair, what's the job you did last before that? And most people are like, I don't know. No, of course. I mean, if you hadn't been asked that question, there's the chances that you're going to immediately have the answer.
Yeah.
But if you can put some time into understanding that, now we got a target we can shoot at, and we can start breaking down. So let's see, what's the journey look like to be in that role? I want to be president of the United States. Okay, what do we need to do?
Okay, it's a big ask, right? Yeah.
Right? Because I don't want to be president. I want to be a professor at a large university, a prestigious university. Okay, great. We got something to work with. Now let's break that down and let's see where do you have gaps? Where do you have experience gaps or education gaps that you need to close? And we can start putting together a plan. That's super useful if tied with that why, helping somebody like take charge, be intentional about their career.
Oh, that makes tons of sense. All right, I want to pivot to two other questions before we kind of run out of time. So the first one is, and this is the obligatory, it's 2026, and we're going to talk about AI for 4 minutes, okay? Which is, so the technology landscape shifted. Now, you and I are like, I think weirdly, almost exactly the same vintage, because like, some of your early stories about things like, I got into computer networking when I was a kid, started getting into technology in 92, the whole protocol, like I remember the 8.5-inch floppy disk, the whole, and then networking and all that. But now AI is the thing, right? And it's a relatively large wave that's going on. And there are a lot of people who are saying, no, this is a difference in kind. Like this is a shift in the landscape of technology. And there are other people who are a little bit more like, no, it's a difference of degree at best, right? Like we've seen these kinds of innovations come and go. I'm kind of curious, where's your head out on this? Like when you think about the AI, like particularly when we think about large language models and the sort of the chatbot revolutions and the sort of like, AI that can talk and reason, that sort of thing. Like, where's your head at? Is this a revolution? Is this a new thing?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a game changer. It is a paradigm shifter. It is. I would say it is to technology what cloud was to technology in 2000.
Okay. All right.
I mean, undeniably that cloud delivered infrastructure, let's say, or services, changed the game. And I think that that's where AI is. But just like cloud in 2008 is where AI is in 2026. And what I mean by that is I said this a minute ago, let me foot stomp it, maybe I'll stand on my desk. It's not about the technology.
Okay.
If you're going to cram AI down my throat and can't tell me what business problem we're solving with it, you don't start with a solution before you hear the question.
Sure. Yeah.
That's absurd. And that's what so many folks are doing, and why we're spending just mountains of capital and time to chase technology when we haven't aligned it with, this is a very important business problem we need to solve. Let's look at our toolkit and see how we can solve it. Oh, look, AI could solve this. That's how it ought to be done. And we're doing it the other way around. Instead, we're saying, hey, look at this awesome new shiny screwdriver I've got. Does anybody have any screw? No, we only got nails. Okay, well, we could use it on a nail.
It's like that Dremel commercial where they have to cut the nail because they can't hammer it. Yeah.
Come on. That's where we were in the early days with everybody wants to move to the cloud because of reasons. And most of those reasons turned out to be wrong. How many times did you hear we're going to move to the cloud so we can save money?
Yeah. No, 100%.
Come on, nobody's ever saved money by going to the cloud. Maybe that's not true, but most use cases can't. Same with a similar story with AI. A lot of the reasons we're doing it, we're not ready yet. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Not ready. Most companies aren't ready for it. Yeah.
Well, and I would also say, just from where I'm sitting, one of the things that's interesting is if you look back at any of the big technological revolutions, what they do is they happen to change cost basis for fundamental things, right? So, for instance, the internet revolution in the late 90s changed fundamentally how much it costs to communicate across long distances. And the reason why pets.com didn't work back then, but Chewy works now, is because the shipping infrastructure caught up with the communication infrastructure, right? And so when I'm looking at AI, my crystal ball is hugely foggy on this, but I keep trying to figure out, I think it's lowering the cost on certain classes of reasoning and certain classes of interaction, but I can't tell exactly how that weaves through, the modern corporate environment in that way, So,
I mean, it's undeniably exciting, and my imagination has it being super important in the next 10 years for sure. And just like, to your point, the internet revolution, there's no end of people willing to throw giant tons of money at it. And those are the kinds of actions that tend to move technologies forward, right? And so I'm super optimistic about what it is. You'll just not see me lead a technology team with AI first. Yeah, it's not about the technology. And once it becomes about the technology, that's when you start getting this disconnect between business and tech that is the cause of so many points of friction.
As a question, and then I want to do one final wrap up question, but it's a question: where were you in your career when you had that particular aha? Right? Because I remember vividly for me. Well, yeah, that it's not about the technology, right? Because I remember vividly for me, I was working on a product, and the product was just hugely advanced relative to the competition. It was acres above the competition. And we ended up not succeeding. And the reason was because the technology was largely irrelevant to the success of the actual company, right? As a thing. And that was a big aha for me. But when did you were you a director? Were you C-level? Where were you when you finally had the aha that, oh my God, it's actually not about.
How great would it have been if I had that aha as a director? No, it was well past that.
Okay.
Probably I was a VP already. Maybe when I took a short run at being SVP of customer success, actually, where for a minute I didn't have a lot of the traditional technology experience. I did that intentionally, as I mentioned earlier, because I wanted to be a CIO of a public company. I thought, wow, check out this differentiator.
Sure.
Maybe in there, certainly by the time I was at Signify, before I got promoted to CIO, I started recognizing it. But it's one of those things you see the evidence of that truth. I was going to say anybody or everybody can see the evidence of that truth. If you'll stop a minute and look at the big picture, you'll see the evidence of that truth as an IC, right? Decisions that are made. But for me, the epiphany probably came at Signify, and that was as a VP. Yeah.
Well, fair enough. One of the things is, in terms of everybody being able to see, I've always noticed those transitions, from individual contributor to manager, director to VP, so on and so forth. When you have the big sort of existential ahas, these sort of revelatory moments, I've always found that then you can't unsee them, right? And you talk to people who haven't done it yet, and you're like, no, seriously, listen to me. And they're like, and it's almost like it's two different languages, right? Going back to ICs and talking to them about look, I get it, Kubernetes, that sounds cool, not a thing. They're just like, what? Yeah.
How could you say that? I think what ends up being, before you get that personal epiphany, he is really Matt he's disconnected.
Yeah, just doesn't get it. Just doesn't get it.
He hasn't been a geek. He's too far away from the technology if he believes that. Right. it looks like disconnection.
Yeah, being out of touch.
We
Yeah.
said Epiphany. Yeah.
So final wrap-up question. We always try to ask this. One resource, a book, a blog, a podcast. Obviously, we'll recommend Integrity Edge, so we'll just take that as stipulated. But there you go. Available at fine booksellers near you. What's one other resource if you were a younger you that you would consult for advancement or intellectual growth?
I mean, if you're just going to one resource, you're going to be in trouble. So use them all.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying pick your favorite. You're like, hey, this one.
You know, I'm a book guy. I think technical stuff is go to books for technical stuff's probably a really bad idea. It's the wrong format. Technical stuff is forums and conversations with peers and stuff like that. So I'm going to put that aside because there's too many of them. And if you try to go to one source, you probably it would be a bad service. But when you start talking about being a leader and about personal actions and about the kind of person that I want to be, kind of leader I want to be, I think extreme ownership ought to be required reading for every human on this planet.
Okay.
All right. You should have to read it before you're allowed to vote or procreate, I think. It really gets down to, if you are in charge of a thing, all the good and bad that happens in that thing is on you. Now let's translate that to, I'm a director. I tell this story, in fact, in my book. I was a VP one time, won't say where. We did a maintenance project, lots of maintenance overnight stuff. One of the guys, super good engineer, he did a maintenance event on a critical piece of hardware. It was a firmware upgrade. It went sideways. The box was bricked, and he had to check the backup. The backup was out of date. So we had a 6-month, 8-month period, and I won't get into the details of the kind of device it was, but things that happened over the 8 months were not reconstructible. Like we couldn't just work hard and rebuild it. It wasn't an option. Now you could say, well, how did Bob not know he was supposed to check the backups? Of course he's supposed to check the backups before you do firmware. Come on, what kind of rookie? But I'm in charge. And the director reports to me and he's in charge. And the manager reports to the director and he's in charge. And are you telling me that it's only Bob's fault, the engineer, and none of those leaders? And the example that I give to extreme ownership is like, if you're heart surgery, we've all watched, we might have made heart surgery, but we've all watched TV shows.
Yeah.
We know what happens when a big complex activity like a transplant or a heart surgery, there's rehearsals and the lead surgeon, he's in charge, and all the people who are involved, where we're supposed to be. And if this happens, you're going to do this. And if that happens, you're going to do that. And they go through all of it and everyone knows it's life and death. Why didn't I make sure Bob knew that checking the backup was that important? And so was Bob at fault? Sure, he was at fault. But if I had trained him better, if the director had trained him better, the chances are he would have been afraid not to change. He would have known what was at stake. And it would have been like, he would have been riveted with fear of not checking the backup first because, oh my gosh, if I don't do that. But he didn't. He didn't do it because we didn't impress upon. That's the kind of message from extreme ownership.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And I mean, like, if you're leading a large organization, you have to kind of count on that, like where there is a distributed sense of this because you as a leader have kind of like brought it into your folks. And either, Bob is very afraid or Bob is motivated by a deep sense of pride in a job well done. Like either way they end up going. So,
now, Matt, to translate that same message though in your home, with your family, with your personal relationships, this notion of ownership, of owning the outcome and not blaming, not pointing fingers. Man.
So fascinating. I will tell you, years ago, before I got, I was getting married, and a friend of mine who had been married for a while ended up talking to me, and he was like, look, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, hear me now, listen now, hear me later. Right. And he said, you get married, you're never at a point where you can say, I've done enough for today. Right. As a thing. And I've always thought about that because it's a very similar thing, which is you're sort of like, you've got to own the fact that like you got to contribute, you got to put in, you got to do the thing, you got to own that result. I think that's fast. Rusty, thank you so much for taking time and spending it with us and sharing all your wisdom. Have a great rest of your day.
Pleasure. Thanks, Matt.